Hello and welcome to Psychological Insights. The late George Carlin had a skit on the me generation. And of course, that's close to my heart because I am the me generation. What seems to have happened is that the me generation has somehow sold the concept to their children that they are all special and they are all gifted and they are all talented. Now, it's very difficult for everyone to be an entire generation to be gifted, talented, and special. Ergo, when this generation grows up, when they go to college, they find out not so special and not so gifted. And this requires and becomes a problem in itself. Today's topic is self-esteem. I'll be talking to Dr. Robert Hamm. He's a psychologist in West Hartford Center. I'm Pat Kazakoff. Stay with me. Hello, Dr. Hamm.
Hi there, Pat.
So we're talking about self-esteem. So that word is bandied about all over the place, but let's start from the very beginning. What exactly is self-esteem?
A lot of people have, I think, some misconceptions about what it is. Um, I thought it would be a good idea to do you know, one of our shows on this topic. Um, on the surface, I mean, self-esteem, we all understand has to do with how confident we are. How much our egos, how much we think of ourselves. And that is a part of it, but that's the rub, I think, to some degree, that gets some people into trouble with regard to what they feel they need in order to be successful in life.
Well, I mentioned at the beginning of my dissertation, I mentioned the fact about the me generation. Is the me generation a contributing factor to this lack of self-esteem?
Um, well, I don't know if I would call it exactly lack of self-esteem, but it does create problems in people being able to become well-adjusted in adulthood. If children are raised with a certain way of conceptualizing what self-esteem is all about, that is not a good formula for being successful in life. The me generation has created problems for many people in terms of feeling successful or becoming successful eventually.
Well, this didn't start specifically with the me generation. Let's talk about post-Second World War, when you had a feeling of abundance and everybody was doing well. Didn't that contribute to the me generation and consequently the me generation contributing to the next generation?
Yeah, I'm not sure what is the next generation. The millennials.
I think it's the millennials, yes.
Right. Gen X, the millennials. I'm not sure what the sequence is. I've lost track, frankly. But yeah, there's a psychologist, a writer. His name is Philip Cushman, who wrote a book, "Constructing the Self, Constructing America." And I used an article that was used to build his book in my class that I teach. Excuse me, I teach at Central Connecticut State part-time. Um, and he talks about how the affluence of post-World War II, which, the baby boomers, that's our generation, of course, was a very optimistic time. It was the world that we lived in at the time was very optimistic, affluent. Um, so, we know how history sort of unfolded over the years, but according to Cushman, there was a lot of emphasis on consumerism. How much can we accumulate status. And it was during that time when actually clinical psychology began. Before World War II, clinical psychology was really just barely existed, or at least not in the way that we know it today. There's so many therapists out there today. So psychotherapy really came into its own in post-World War II America.
So could it be said, or am I being a little flip, that the preponderance of psychotherapists and self-help books and just that concentration perhaps was part of the thing that fueled this me generation? Maybe it's your fault. Could that be the psychotherapist's fault that we're in this set of circumstances?
Yeah, well, I mean, Cushman says yes. The article that he wrote that contributed to his book, it was in the American Psychologist. He was writing to psychologists. Um, so yeah, so there's a term for that. It's called iatrogenic. That's when the the treatment makes the problem worse. In some ways, yes. In that, sort of Woody Allen is sort of the poster boy for neurosis. And he's been in psychoanalysis for at least famously, infamously, for many years. Um, and the psychologist Otto Rank, who was a colleague of Freud's, was a critic of therapy for this reason, that sort of paradoxically, psychotherapy can create a greater degree of self-consciousness about who we are in relation to who we think we should be. Um, so if the way you define self-esteem is contextualized within the way that our society is constructed in a consumerist way, then self-esteem becomes a part of that. That, in other words, we believe that in order for us to be successful, we have to have a lot of money, we have to have a lot of status, um, and we have to we identify self-esteem with um, accumulation of things, comparing ourselves to other people, our endowments, as opposed to the things that made us successful, that led to America to being great. I hate to use that term these days, but which is hard work and taking risks and being a more of a contributing member to society. A
So
very narrow, yeah.
let's talk a little bit about that. I mean, basically this topic is about self-esteem, and you're saying that all these things contributed. It wasn't just the me generation that contributed. It started a while ago, and we're in the context of that. This is the result of that conceptual map that you're alluding to.
Yeah, the
So
me generation is an outgrowth of it. It's not the cause. Yeah.
right. So let's go back to the basics. What are the building blocks of this self-esteem? I know that they're not, for sure, they're not telling your child he's special and gifted when indeed he's not. That for sure is not a building block.
Right. So as with everything, I think when it comes to raising your children is concerned, I think you have to walk that fine line. It's very difficult. I never had children, but I work with many patients who do. I know people. I have nephews and nieces, etc. Um, and it's a balancing act between uh, giving a child a sense that they are special and loved, regardless of what they do, and that there's a kind of contingent love, that children are expected to make efforts in life and to risk and to face disappointments and failures and to grow outside their own egos and their own self-centered interests to become contributing members of society in order to be successful.
So what does that mean when you say that you have to take risks? What does that mean to take risks? What's a practical example of a child taking risks?
Well, uh, um, I'm not sure how to give an example. It seems sort of self-evident. Taking risks means that you're going to have to make efforts, with the understanding that your efforts aren't always going to land the way you want them to. Um, and that's how you learn. That's how you grow. That's how you build self-esteem. Self-esteem eventuates out of the accomplishments that we garner in life only if we're able to take the risks to fail and be disappointed, pick ourselves up again, and find other ways to find what we need to do in order to get where we want to go, or to change our goals. That maybe this goal is not, I want to be a doctor. Oh, I didn't get the grades. What am I going to do? Am I a failure in life? Or do I find something else that also uses my talents and interests where I can reach my potentials in a different career path?
You mentioned something quite interesting to me, that you said that self-esteem comes out of accomplishments. In other words, you have to do something to earn the title of special or gifted. Breathing is not sufficient.
I think that that is where we get into trouble in our society and confusing uh, the foundations of self-esteem. I think children get the wrong message that self-esteem is a function they in our society. If it's a consumer society, it's about what we possess. And what is that? That's our talents, a good-looking, intelligent, personality, athletic. They confuse the formula for success as as meaning you have to have these endowments, as opposed to it's the efforts you make in life, the risks that you take, what you accumulate from all the efforts that you have made in order to achieve something. A big difference. But in order to do that, children have to detach their sense of self-worth from the outcomes of their efforts. Otherwise, every time they fail, if they associate that failure with their sense of self-worth, they're not going to take risks anymore. They're going to feel crushed because they're going to feel that every time they're disappointed and they fail, that they themselves are a failure. So they personalize. So you have to make that distinction between self-worth and outcomes of your efforts in order to be willing to take those risks.
Yeah, I'm hearing you loud and clear that it's not about the win, but it's about the effort that you put into getting the win.
Yeah,
That
that's right, exactly. We all want to win. That's the purpose, but the formula for winning is different um, when you understand that winning is contingent on those efforts and the hard work rather than just your endowments, your gifts.
So
Uh,
what can a parent do, given that they live in today's society, and given that if you go to any little league game, everybody gets a trophy, everybody's a winner. It's politically incorrect to say this is a winner and this is not the winner. So how does a parent navigate that fine line, given that the parent lives in this world?
well, I don't, I mean, you can't fight City Hall. I mean, if this is the way that things are set up in school or in society, well, I mean, you have no control over that. But nonetheless, parents have that leverage with their children, especially early in life, of course, to teach them what it takes in order to be successful, to demonstrate to them that they're loved no matter what the outcomes of their efforts are. All they ask their children to do is to, uh, they teach them that children owe it to themselves to make those efforts because in order to do so, that's what is necessary in order to be successful. That is of course, an important lesson that parents have to inculcate in their children. So they can do that even though we live in this kind of narcissistic sort of me generation society. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
So, um, what does a child shows this lack of self-esteem, not when they're very young, but usually when they're 18, 19, 20, when they sort of leave the house. That's when you see it the most. You know, some of
No,
them,
no,
no,
I mean,
I'm wrong.
no, even little children. I mean, it's all ages. I think children suffer from depression. It might show itself differently than adults. Low self-esteem. I mean, right from an early age, children are aware of what their status is in their groups, in school, in their communities and neighborhoods. They know whether they have money or not, whether they're attractive or athletic or big or small or liked, popular or not. That's very clear to children from
So
an
what
early age.
what does unhealthy self-esteem look like? Like, what are the signs that parents should look for that something's going wrong, that the child doesn't have a lot of self-esteem? Because perhaps you don't see it right away because the child is winning all his athletic games and he is doing well. So, what are the signs of unhealthy self-esteem?
Well, thank you for asking. First, I want to just define what unhealthy self-esteem is,
Okay.
because I'm using my own terms here. I kind of made them up. Um, Distinguishing unhealthy self-esteem from low self-esteem. Um, so, uh, so unhealthy self-esteem is when it appears that someone has self-esteem, but it's not healthy, and so there are elements within their sense of self which are not right, um, so that they're kind of false or they're um, based on a fantasy that's unrealistic. Low self-esteem is when that uh, feeling of not being good enough is internalized and a child feels inferior. So a person with unhealthy self-esteem might feel superior, but there's another part of themselves that feels inferior. They're kind of a mixture, but it often manifests unhealthy self-esteem as arrogance, as being conceited, or um, could be a bully, um, or someone who has unrealistic expectations of themselves, and so they expect that they're supposed to win every time, but when they lose, they become extremely upset and angry. And so these are signs of high self-expectations, high self-esteem, but there's another part of oneself that doesn't accept oneself entirely, so that they have to be successful all the time. So it's a very brittle, sort of tenuous kind of self-esteem, unhealthy self-esteem. And so that's how you're going to see it in children or adults, people who are narcissistic, people who are depressed and self-centered at the same time. They might show problems in their intimate relationships, have addictions or anxiety disorders, even though they appear to be very confident. Or you have the narcissist, the sociopaths, who are very high self-esteem individuals, but underneath there are deep feelings of insecurity that cause them to um, have psychological problems, interpersonal problems. And you're going to see this in children as well. Um, Although, we really haven't, personality is not entirely crystallized in childhood, but we can see it in their affect and in their behaviors often.
You differentiated between unhealthy self-esteem, which is one of your terms, but and low self-esteem. Give me a demonstration. How does low self-esteem present itself?
A child who has low self-esteem or an adult is going to be likely to be timid, fearful, is not going to be able to assert themselves in life, They're going to be susceptible to depression, anxiety disorders. Um, they're going to be underachievers in life. They're going to be overly deferential, or maybe passive aggressive. So usually, so low self-esteem manifests itself in those ways. Often people who do not reach their potentials in life because they have low expectations of themselves.
And how, well, is this, this is a basic question, but can you change that? Like with therapy, can you change low self-esteem or unhealthy self-esteem with therapy? Can you do something about it?
Well, yes. I mean, as you were saying earlier, I mean, post-World War II America in therapy, we as therapists made a living largely and grew on this whole problem. How do we, get self-esteem, or how do we fix this feelings of low self-esteem? Um, so certainly, this is what many therapists do in their practice. But again, uh, whether or not we can help people or make them worse depends on how we define self-esteem. So a part of a therapist's responsibility is to help a patient, whether it's a child or working with an adult, how to define self-esteem in a healthy way. That it entails the ability to take risks, to accept oneself even if one fails, to attach one's sense of self-worth based on effort as opposed to endowments or accolades. And what William James, the founder of one of the founders of psychology here in the United States, calls sympathy, which is extending oneself beyond one's ego, so that you are less invested in sort of bolstering your ego, as opposed to reaching out to others, and what influence, what good are you doing, your charitableness in society, how much you give to others, what are your contributions to society, your family, etc. Um, this is what therapists should be focusing on to help patients who are suffering from low self-esteem.
So this is, of course, a natural segue into how does one build self-esteem? Besides the therapist, basically it's a partnership between the therapist and the person.
That's right.
The person maintains some responsibility also. So how does one build self-esteem?
So, you know, so many patients come in for therapy because things haven't gone right in their lives, in their childhood. They weren't raised properly, or there are issues. And so that's the therapist's job, to try to correct, or to contribute to their psyche, so to speak, what was missing or wasn't done right. And so, in answer to your question, a very good question. So two things. One is that we want to help them to think differently about themselves. We want to help people think differently, um, so that when you fail, you don't attach that failure to self-worth, but rather you attach your self-worth to the efforts that you're making. So it's very important in working with a patient, or just if you're on your own doing this, to set goals for yourself, and hold yourself accountable to them, and start getting involved, taking risks, so that you give yourself the opportunity in life to succeed. If as the saying goes, you can't win if you don't play. But that often fails if you don't have the mental equipment to do this, meaning that it's important to get out there and take risks, but you're not going to take risks, or if you take risks and you fail, you're not going to continue to take risks unless you have the internal dialogue going, learning the mental skills to be able to persevere. when you're facing disappointments. So all therapists also works with the patient in how they interpret the outcomes of situations, so they don't sabotage their efforts to achieve more in life. Otherwise, they're going to feel crushed every time there's a disappointment, and they're not going to continue trying anymore. So there are two things that we have to work on: a person's thinking styles and their efforts to actually go out there. It's called behavior therapy. Set goals and then start to make efforts to reach them.
So this thinking style that you're talking about, are you referring to self-talk? Like, in other words, I talk to myself and I say, what's this an indicator of? How can I be better? And okay, I didn't win, but the consequence is really nothing. There's no consequence to not winning. Is that part of it? Like the
Well,
self-talk? Do you
that's,
teach
yeah,
that?
yes, it is exactly. It is a self-talk, self-dialogue, and many people are not aware of this going on. They just kind of it's in our subconscious, our framework, our mental framework, so that there is this kind of editorializing that goes on in the background in our minds we're not aware of that affects our moods and our willingness to take risks in life. So therapy um, also has to work with the patient to bring to mind what's in the background in our thoughts that we're not aware of. Um, and so there, therapists have different tools to do that. So if you're more psychodynamic, you're looking at the sort of defense mechanisms there and trying to dismantle those. Or if you're working in a more cognitive therapy framework, there are exercises that you can use to help bring these subconscious belief systems, if you will, to the forefront.
So if I'm understanding you correctly, like most of our feelings and things, they're sort of automatic. You just sort of feel them and it's automatic. And what you're talking about in therapy, I'm paraphrasing a little bit for myself so that I can understand, is that you're teaching a person how to look at a situation differently and how to become aware that it's not, you're not on automatic pilot when something goes wrong. When something goes wrong, you talk to yourself and say, okay, this went wrong. What went into this going wrong? What could I have done differently? And sort of that self-talk makes you more aware, and gradually you're more aware of your feelings, and your feelings guide you. There's people who aren't aware of their feelings. They're just, as I said, on automatic pilot.
Yes, I think that most of us in sort of in like what the natural attitude we have, unfortunately, is somewhat naive, that we think that how we feel is a function of what happens around us, or the outcomes of our efforts, when in fact it's more the internal dialogue. It's our relationships with ourselves and our belief systems. So that's that mediating, that intervening variable, so to speak, that is the self-talk that you identified a moment ago, that is critical that we understand as influencing our mood, our self-concept, and our willingness to take risk. And the only way in order for us to be able to address these problems then is for us to become more aware of what's going on inside. Yes. Yeah.
I'm listening to you, and this self-esteem is a huge topic, and I think it probably affects every single person. That everyone's on the continuum. There's nobody who's not on the continuum, on unhealthy self-esteem, low self-esteem, high self-esteem. Everybody's somewhere. And what I'm hearing from you is that you can deal with it, that something can happen. but you have to take steps. You have to recognize that something's wrong. And with a skilled therapist and being conscious, you're part of the equation, things can change. So thank you very much, Dr. Hamm. As always, we've had an interesting discussion. This one is particularly close to my heart. You know, I have millennial children, so it's special. And I don't know if you have a topic for next month, if that's been determined. Yes, no?
No, not yet.
Okay, so
Yeah,
we'll wait.
working
We'll
on
wait.
it. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr.
Okay,
Hamm.
good.